Tonight we present
The Hat Man, Visions of Sleep Paralysis. The mystery surrounding the Hat Man figure in sleep paralysis experiences has fascinated and bewildered researchers and experiencers alike for decades. Millions of individuals around the world have reported encountering this shadowy figure during episodes of sleep paralysis. Whether it is a collective hallucination or a paranormal phenomenon is still up for debate, but the consistency of the descriptions and the unsettling nature of these encounters have left a trail of unanswered questions. The Hat Man is often described as a tall, shadowy figure, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat, with an air of cold indifference toward the individuals who experience him. These encounters typically occur during episodes of sleep paralysis, where the sleeper finds themselves awake but unable to move or speak, trapped in a state between sleep and wakefulness. While many assume that these experiences are simply the result of the mind being trapped in a temporary state of paralysis, a growing body of evidence suggests that there may be more to these encounters than meets the eye. Throughout history, reports of shadowy figures appearing during sleep paralysis have been documented in various cultures around the world. However, it wasn't until the 20th century, with the rise of scientific investigation into sleep disorders and the exploration of paranormal phenomena, that the figure of the Hat Man began to gain widespread attention. What makes this phenomenon so striking is not just the consistent descriptions from different individuals, but the eerie and unsettling presence that these figures seem to embody. Many experiencers report feeling an overwhelming sense of fear or dread when encountering the Hat Man, as though they are being watched by an entity that exists beyond the physical world. Sleep paralysis, the condition that often accompanies these encounters with shadowy figures, has long been studied by sleep scientists and psychologists. Traditionally, sleep paralysis was explained as a natural phenomenon that occurs during the transition between sleep stages, particularly during rapid eye movement, REM sleep. During this time, the body is effectively paralyzed to prevent us from acting out our dreams. However, some individuals report that they experience vivid hallucinations, including the sensation of a dark, menacing presence, while others, like those who encounter the Hat Man, describe seeing an actual figure during these episodes. In the late 20th century, researchers began to look more closely at the connections between sleep paralysis and paranormal experiences. In 1991, Dr. Susan Hartley, a leading parapsychologist, began investigating cases of individuals reporting the Hat Man figure. She found that many of these individuals, while under the influence of sleep paralysis, described the figure as something more than a mere product of their minds. The consistency of the descriptions across cultures and backgrounds led Dr. Hartley and others to question whether this was truly just a hallucination or whether there was something else at play. While mainstream science largely attributed these experiences to neurological or psychological phenomena, the growing number of testimonies left an increasing number of researchers exploring the possibility of a deeper, more mysterious explanation. Could the Hat Man be a manifestation of a collective unconscious, a shared experience among those who encounter this figure during sleep paralysis? Or, as some have suggested, could the Hat Man be something more sinister, an entity that exists in a realm beyond our own? One of the most well-known and thoroughly documented cases of a Hat Man encounter occurred in 2010, when a young woman named Sarah Simmons shared her experience during a parapsychology conference. Sarah had been suffering from recurrent episodes of sleep paralysis since her teenage years, and during these episodes, she would frequently experience the sensation of being watched by an ominous presence. In one particularly vivid encounter, she described seeing the Hat Man standing at the foot of her bed, staring at her with piercing, unseen eyes. What made Sarah's case particularly intriguing was the clarity of her descriptions. She reported that the Hat Man was not just a shadow, but a distinct figure, dressed in a dark suit and wide-brimmed hat. She described a sense of dread and coldness emanating from him, and she vividly recalled how, during her paralysis, the figure seemed to communicate with her, though not in any conventional way. Instead of speaking, the Hat Man's presence seemed to communicate a silent, oppressive force, one that made Sarah feel as if she was in the presence of something ancient and malevolent. Sarah's encounter was not an isolated incident. Over the course of the next few years, more people began coming forward with similar reports, all describing the Hat Man in strikingly similar terms. Researchers began collecting testimonies and comparing them to other documented cases of sleep paralysis, uncovering a disturbing pattern of consistent descriptions. In some instances, people reported feeling that the Hat Man was not just an observer, but an active participant in their paralysis, as if he had the ability to control or manipulate their thoughts and actions. The more Sarah's case was investigated, the more mysterious the situation became. Experts in sleep paralysis, psychology, and parapsychology began to question whether the Hat Man was simply a psychological manifestation, or if there could be a paranormal explanation for the phenomenon. Were these encounters a collective hallucination, a product of the mind's response to the fear and terror of sleep paralysis? Or could the Hat Man be an entity that exists in a parallel realm, interacting with those who are in a vulnerable state of consciousness? The investigation into the Hat Man phenomenon began to grow in complexity as researchers explored a wide range of theories. One of the central questions that emerged was whether the Hat Man could be an entity that existed outside of the individual's mind, a manifestation of a larger, shared psychic experience. Some parapsychologists suggested that the Hat Man might represent a collective unconscious, a shared symbol that appeared during sleep paralysis episodes, while others speculated that the figure could be a type of interdimensional being capable of interacting with human consciousness from a different plane of existence. A particularly disturbing development occurred when one of the investigators, Dr. Jeremy Collins, an expert in sleep disorders, experienced a personal encounter with the Hat Man. Dr. Collins had long been skeptical of paranormal explanations for sleep paralysis, but his own experience during a sleep study changed his perspective. He described waking up during an episode of paralysis and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. As he tried to move, he saw the figure of the Hat Man standing at the foot of his bed. The Hat Man was silent, but his presence filled Dr. Collins with an intense feeling of coldness and fear. For the first time, Dr. Collins felt that he was experiencing something that could not be explained by science alone. This event deepened the mystery, and the investigators were now faced with an undeniable question. If someone as grounded in science as Dr. Collins could experience the Hat Man firsthand, what did that mean for our understanding of sleep paralysis? Was it possible that the Hat Man was not just a product of the brain's response to sleep paralysis, but a genuine paranormal phenomenon? As the investigation continued, more questions emerged than answers. The growing number of testimonies, including Dr. Collins' own experience, suggested that the Hat Man was not just a figment of imagination, but a genuine, shared phenomenon. Some researchers began to entertain the possibility that the figure was a manifestation of a collective unconscious, while others speculated that the Hat Man was an entity that existed in a realm beyond human comprehension. With each new encounter and each new testimony, the mystery of the Hat Man only deepened. Was he simply a terrifying hallucination, a manifestation of fear during sleep paralysis? Or was he something more? A figure who crossed the boundaries between the known and the unknown, existing in a place beyond our understanding. As the investigation reached a standstill, one thing became clear. The phenomenon of the Hat Man was far from being fully understood. The answers that researchers were seeking remained elusive, and the mystery surrounding the figure only grew more perplexing. What lay ahead for those who sought to uncover the truth about the Hat Man? The only certainty was that this case had only just begun. The investigation into the Hat Man phenomenon had reached a critical point. After Dr. Collins' personal experience with the figure, many researchers began to rethink their initial theories. Could there be a connection between the Hat Man and the collective unconscious? Or was he a supernatural entity, transcending the boundaries of our understanding of reality? As more testimonies and cases were gathered, a chilling pattern began to emerge, suggesting that the Hat Man was no mere hallucination. The breakthrough came when a group of researchers, led by Dr. Collins, decided to delve deeper into the idea that the Hat Man might be a manifestation of a higher level of consciousness, a being that existed in a parallel dimension, crossing over into our reality during sleep paralysis episodes. They began to explore the connection between these experiences and individuals who reported heightened psychic abilities or encounters with other paranormal phenomena. One of the more startling testimonies came from Claire Hughes, a woman who had been experiencing sleep paralysis episodes for years. Claire had always been sensitive to certain energies, which she believed were linked to her heightened sense of intuition. During one of her episodes, she described the Hat Man not just as a menacing figure, but as a being with a presence that seemed to communicate with her through emotions rather than words. Claire reported feeling an intense sense of sadness emanating from the figure, which led her to believe that the Hat Man might be a manifestation of unresolved emotions or trauma. The more cases that were studied, the more it became clear that the Hat Man wasn't just a fear-inducing figure. He seemed to represent something more profound, an entity with its own emotional energy, and one that could interact with the subconscious mind on a deep, personal level. As researchers delved into the psychology of those who encountered the figure, they discovered a disturbing connection. Many of the experiencers had suffered from trauma, loss, or periods of extreme stress in their lives. It seemed that the Hat Man was more likely to appear to those who were emotionally vulnerable or in a state of mental distress. The discovery that the Hat Man might be connected to emotional trauma opened up a new avenue of investigation. Researchers began to theorize that this figure was not simply a being from another dimension, but a psychic imprint, an entity that was tied to the emotional energies of those it visited. The idea of an energy being capable of crossing into the physical world during a vulnerable state of consciousness was both compelling and terrifying. Could the Hat Man be a sentient being, feeding off the emotional energy of the experiencer? Or was he a kind of psychic echo, an imprint left behind by unresolved emotional trauma? Dr. Collins and his team continued to collect data from individuals who had experienced the Hat Man. One particularly striking case involved a man named Robert Owens, who had suffered from deep depression and anxiety after the sudden death of his wife. Robert reported seeing the Hat Man during his sleep paralysis episodes and described the figure as a shadow of sadness that seemed to reflect his own emotional state. It was as though the Hat Man had appeared as a mirror to Robert's inner turmoil, magnifying his pain and fear in a way that felt almost deliberate. In another case, a woman named Eva Martinez described her encounter with the Hat Man during a particularly difficult time in her life. Eva had recently lost her job and was going through a personal crisis. During her sleep paralysis episode, she saw the Hat Man standing at the foot of her bed, staring at her with his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face. However, instead of feeling the usual fear, Eva reported that she felt an overwhelming sense of sympathy emanating from the figure. She said it was as if the Hat Man understood her pain, and for a brief moment, she felt a sense of connection with him, as though he was offering some kind of comfort. These encounters raised more questions than answers. If the Hat Man was indeed tied to the emotional state of the individual, could he be an external manifestation of the subconscious mind? Or was there something more at play? Some deeper force that operated beyond the confines of the mind, interacting with the consciousness of those it encountered? The investigation took an unexpected turn when Dr. Collins uncovered an ancient text that mentioned a figure very similar to the Hat Man. The text, dated back to the early 18th century, described a shadow figure that appeared during moments of extreme emotional distress, particularly during times of death or grief. The figure was described as a tall, dark figure wearing a wide-brimmed hat, standing at the edge of the bed and observing those who were vulnerable. This discovery shocked the research team. The Hat Man, or something resembling him, had been documented for centuries. Was it possible that this figure was not just a modern phenomenon, but a timeless entity that had been crossing the boundaries of human consciousness for hundreds of years? The connection between the Hat Man and periods of trauma and loss seemed to echo the descriptions in the ancient text. Could it be that this figure was somehow tied to the human experience of grief and suffering, appearing during moments of vulnerability to feed off the emotional energy of those who encountered him? Dr. Collins and his team were left with a troubling realization. The Hat Man might not be just a temporary hallucination or a product of sleep paralysis. He could be a manifestation of something much larger, an ancient, timeless force that had been interacting with human consciousness for centuries. As the team continued their research, they discovered a pattern that tied together the stories of those who had encountered the Hat Man. While the figure was often terrifying, many experiencers reported that their encounters had profound psychological effects. Some described feeling a sense of closure after their encounter, as though they had confronted their deepest fears or emotional wounds. Others reported a sense of peace, as though the Hat Man had offered them some kind of release from their inner turmoil. In the end, the Hat Man phenomenon remained an enigma. Was he a psychic imprint, a being that existed to feed off emotional energy? Or was he something more, a timeless force that existed beyond our understanding of reality? As the investigation came to a close, Dr. Collins and his team could not provide a definitive answer. What they had uncovered, however, was a deeper understanding of the human psyche and the powerful connection between our emotions and the entities that might cross our paths during moments of vulnerability. The case of the Hat Man left more questions than answers. While some researchers speculated that the figure was a manifestation of the collective unconscious, others believed that he was an interdimensional being with his own mysterious agenda. The fact that the Hat Man had been encountered by individuals from all walks of life, across different cultures and time periods, suggested that his existence transcended the boundaries of individual experience. The mystery of the Hat Man was far from being solved, but one thing was clear. There was more to this phenomenon than meets the eye. Could the Hat Man be an entity that exists in a realm beyond our understanding? A figure that interacts with us during moments of vulnerability and emotional distress? Or was he simply a psychological manifestation, a product of our deepest fears and emotions? The truth remains elusive, but the phenomenon of the Hat Man continues to haunt the minds of those who encounter him, leaving behind an unanswered question. What is he, and why does he appear at the most vulnerable moments of our lives?
The questions don't end here, nor does our pursuit. If this story unveiled something you never expected to discover, then you're in the right place. Remember to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this tale with others who, like you, are drawn to the unknown. Here, mystery always finds its voice. Until we meet again, where the inexplicable will once again serve as our starting point.